Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are jumping right into a place where breathtaking beauty meets an absolute daily struggle for survival. We're talking about the Sundarbans. We'll be using insights directly from our source materials to really unpack this masterclass in resilience. It's an incredibly fragile, dangerous balance between human necessity and nature's boundaries. This isn't just your standard story about nature. It's a deep dive into what actually happens when an unstoppable climate force meets an immovable apex predator, and humanity is caught right smack in the middle. The Bengal tiger is absolutely the undisputed apex predator here. But to truly grasp the story of the Sundarbans, we have to look way past the mystique of this incredible animal. This is not just some sprawling, untouched wildlife sanctuary. It's an intense pressure cooker of an ecosystem where tigers and humanity are locked in a daily, high-stakes negotiation for space. And these tigers, they are uniquely adapted to this environment. They swim incredibly long distances in saline water, and they navigate thick mud with total ease. It makes them absolute masters of a domain that humans are, unfortunately, increasingly forced to enter. The sheer scale of this shared space it's hard to wrap your head around. We're talking about 10,000 square kilometers of shifting, mangrove-dominated landscapes spread across India and Bangladesh. Now, imagine 4.5 million people. That is roughly the population of a major metropolitan city, and they're sharing this exact same shrinking ecosystem with one of the most formidable predators on Earth. So how do millions of people navigate daily life when a densely populated tiger reserve is practically in their backyard, separated only by thin stretches of river? Well, the irony of this intense environment is actually hidden right in its name. Sundarban literally translates to beautiful forest. It's widely believed to come from the Sundarani mangrove tree species that totally dominates the delta. These dense mangroves, with their intricate breathing root systems, are a vital natural shelter. They literally hold the muddy earth together and act as a massive physical shield against oceanic storms. It is a landscape of breathtaking biodiversity. But, as we'll see, the daily conditions for the people living among those Sundarani roots are entirely unforgiving. The geography of this region is basically a complex, sprawling maze of rivers, which makes it incredibly perilous. Human settlements push right up against the dense, dark green core of the tiger reserve. There are no vast, empty buffer zones to keep the peace here. Humans and tigers live cheek by jowl. The borders aren't solid walls. They are incredibly fluid. They're defined by fragile waterways and the daily changing of the tides that constantly literally rewrite the boundaries between the safety of the village and the wild. Because of this setup, survival here requires people to step directly into the wild ecosystem every single day. The soil is fertile, sure, but creeping river salinity forces farmers to rely on salt-tolerant kharif rice just to get a harvest. Deep inside the mangroves, you have traditional honey collectors, known as mules. They navigate thick forests, fending off swarms of bees while constantly watching their backs for tigers. And along the muddy banks, crab harvesting has become an absolute economic lifeline due to its massive export value. But the catch? Every single one of these livelihoods puts humans directly in the tiger's domain. And these traditional livelihoods yield a pretty stark economic reality. Our sources point out that over 40% of households in the Indian Sundarbans live in poverty. Compounding this is a literacy rate hovering barely above 60%, which is well below the state average. This lack of access to education means alternative job opportunities outside the forest are practically non-existent. People aren't risking their lives entering the dense mangroves because they want to, they do it out of absolute necessity. When there are no office jobs or factories to turn to, the forest is literally the only option left. As if the extreme poverty wasn't enough, the landscape itself is under absolute siege from compounding climate threats. Massive cyclones and rising sea levels are systematically destroying what little safe agricultural land remains. Back in 2009, Cyclone Iled displaced a staggering 2.3 million people. Fast forward to 2020, and Cyclone Ampan breached embankments, violently flooding fields with seawater. This rising sea level is literally salting the earth. It collapses crop yields and traps these communities in a vicious, relentless cycle of poverty and environmental destruction. This accelerating climate crisis leads us to a really heartbreaking question. What inevitably happens when desperate people run out of options? When the family farm fails because the soil is just too salty to grow rice, the deep mangrove forest, with its honey, its fish, and its highly valuable crabs, becomes the only resource left to exploit. It's essentially the only bank left in town for these families to withdraw from. But as we know, that vault is heavily guarded by its natural apex predator. The result of this desperate overlap is truly chilling. There are about 20 reported negative human-tiger interactions every single year. Let that number sink in for a second. This isn't some rare anomaly or a freak accident that makes the local news once a decade. It is a persistent, structural reality of sharing the shrinking landscape. Every single year, 24 human lives violently intersect with the Bengal tiger simply because both species are competing for the exact same territory. And when these encounters do happen, the outcomes are devastating. An overwhelming 80% of the time, a human and a tiger cross paths in these muddy creeks, it results in a human fatality. 80%. The Bengal tiger is a master ambush predator, perfectly adapted to the dense foliage and shifting waters of this exact terrain. A human caught waist-deep in the water or dragging their boots through thick mud stands almost zero chance of escaping a 400-pound predator striking from the brush. The tragedy is only compounded when you look at what these people are actually doing when they are attacked. Routine, deeply necessary tasks like crab harvesting account for a massive portion of these fatal encounters. Because crabs have such a high market value, they are an economic lifeline for climate-battered families. But harvesting them requires workers to stand vulnerable and exposed, often for hours at a time, in the exact same narrow, winding waterways that the tigers use to hunt and travel. It's so absolutely crucial that we view this not as some sensational animal attack story, but as a tragic, unavoidable collision of two incredibly vulnerable populations fighting for extremely limited space. The tiger is simply trying to exist and hunt within its natural, rapidly shrinking habitat. Meanwhile, the humans, they're just trying to put food on the table in an environment that is quite literally dissolving beneath their feet. It's a daily, desperate struggle for existence on both sides of the riverbank. Okay, but there is a path forward here. Organizations like the Wildlife Trust of India are deploying what they call primary response teams to peacefully manage these intense situations. Because when a tiger wanders into a village, panic is the absolute enemy. These community-led teams act fast. They secure the perimeter, they manage terrified villagers to prevent retaliatory killings, and they carefully ensure safe passage for the tiger right back into the deep forest. They are actively turning potential bloodbaths into peaceful resolutions, saving both human and tiger lives in the process. Alongside that human intervention, we're seeing an incredible deployment of technology to keep both sides safe. It's this fascinating mix of low-tech and high-tech solutions. On the low-tech side, you have physical barriers like nylon net fencing along the rivers that psychologically deter tigers from crossing. On the high-tech side, animal intrusion detection systems, or ANIDRs, use sensors to detect movement and flash lights or sound alarms to scare off wandering tigers. Add in AI-enabled camera traps acting as early warning radars and GPS SOS devices that call in speedboat evacuation units. I mean, it's a remarkably robust defense system. Of course, all this on-the-ground technology really only works when it's backed by serious policy. This requires a massive, coordinated effort where government bodies like the Government of West Bengal and the National Tiger Conservation Authority unite with local NGOs under a comprehensive tiger conservation plan. By aligning conservation efforts directly with local employment schemes, they aren't just protecting tigers, they are actively working to stabilize household incomes so that fewer people are forced into the danger zone of the mangroves to begin with. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. As the climate crisis accelerates and sea levels continue to literally swallow the land, the pressure on this ecosystem is only going to intensify. Community-driven solutions and relentless innovation are, for sure, the only ways forward. But the ultimate question remains: can our policies, our technology, and our empathy evolve fast enough to ensure there is still enough beautiful forest left for both humans and tigers? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.